responsible for the majority, we're recording, that's great, are responsible to for over 75% of global resource use, and produce the majority of global greenhouse gas emissions. And we have probably all seen the stats. Cities are growing. The projections state that in 2050, over 2/3 of the global population will live in cities. So that makes them a leverage point. But we've been fueling this urban growth in the past through an extractive economy, an unsustainable model in which we take, make, and then dispose. So just to reiterate, we take metals from very far away. We create these productive systems that we use to feed our cities, or what we define as productive systems, that require lots of land and also encroach on what nature feels is a productive system, right? A very diverse system instead of monocultures. So after we grab these resources, we manufacture or process them into products that we can sometimes not even take apart. So it's very difficult to dismantle them. And then once we ship them all over the world and then consume them. And once we've consumed them, we get rid of them, and not always in the most sustainable way. Sometimes we don't even know what we do with our waste, and that often affects groups of people that are already marginalized. So recapping, cities far extend their footprints. So although it's only 3% physical, much more land is used to produce these cities. They are growing resource use and emissions. We are crossing the planetary boundaries, and you might have seen this diagram before. It's a diagram produced by the Stockholm Resiliency Center. This is an older version, I now see, but what it states is that these are 12 planetary boundaries that we should not cross if we want to keep a safe operating space for all life on the planet. So it involves the ocean acidification or freshwater use, but also biogeochemical flows. So what you see here at the bottom is phosphorus and nitrogen. These are critical building blocks that we need to grow food, and we are already transgressing the kind of zones of uncertainty. So we're at high risk of not keeping enough of that to actually feed our populations. So all this resource use and crossing these planetary boundaries has impacts on our planet, right? So we are talking, as I was saying, about acidification, about toxic environments. We have air pollution in cities. And again, these are often affecting populations or other human populations or other species or ecosystems that are already under pressure. Resources and impacts are not distributed equally within cities as well. Anyway, so we have been fueling the growth of our cities in a very unsustainable way. And then we're facing this trend of cities that are growing. This is a map of projected megacities in 2030. So you see that there's a lot of growth going on. And with that growth, there's also lots of energy demand and material demand. So if we don't change the way that we live in our cities, it's going to be really difficult to create a healthy planet. And in order to create this healthy planet, we should address our economy. So we need to decouple the increase of human well-being. So making sure that we all have a great, that we thrive in our cities, right? But we need to decouple that from the resources that we use and the environmental impact that we trigger with the resources that we use. So decoupling, which leads to the question, how might cities grow without crossing these planetary boundaries while making sure that we have enough resources for all inhabitants and distribute them in an equitable and just way? And what does that look like, a sustainable urban future? I think this diagram captured it quite nicely. This is from the donut economy from Kate Rayward. But yeah, of course, it's a diagram. So what it shows is that we shouldn't cross those planetary boundaries, but we also need to safeguard our social foundation. So thinking about, you might have seen the pyramid of Maslow once, thinking about these like crucial building blocks we need for our societies to thrive. So food, health, but also gender equality, social equity, thinking about all these fundamental societal building blocks. What does that look like? So bringing this into practice, you might have seen movies about utopia or seen these images, but if we look at a city, like there's lots of different things coming together, right? But we need healthy city, we need to integrate green spaces, but we also need to think about how we produce our energy. We need a local economy, right? Like we need to produce food. There's also other materials that we need. So how do you bring this together? Also thinking about the different actors. So a city instead of a company, it's not one thing, right? There's lots of different actors involved here. You're dealing with governments, but you're also dealing with citizens, right? Or universities. So when we work with cities, we really need to involve lots of different people, thinking not only of that physical space itself, but also about the whole supply chain that we need to maintain or produce these cities. So how do we get towards a sustainable urban future? So this is something I was already talking about that in the intro, but this is something that we work on with Metabolic. So we are an ecosystem of organizations, for those of you who just joined, working with governments and businesses and NGOs and academia to drive global systems change. So our mission is to transition the global economy to a fundamentally sustainable state as soon as possible. And we are working with approximately 100 humans from all over the world towards this mission. So one of the ways of changing towards this sustainable state is this framework called the circular economy. So we just addressed this linear economy that has been driving the growth in our cities, not sustainable, but a circular economy. We try to close these loops and make sure that we valorize, like use as little resources, but also reuse the ones that we can. So just to frame the circular economy a bit more, when we think about the circular economy, oftentimes the thing that comes to mind first is recycling, right? Like, so if we have an old phone and we, like we don't want it anymore, you want a new one, or it breaks, you might throw it in a recycling bag or a recycling place, bring it to a grocery store. I'm not sure how it's arranged where you live, but sometimes we don't know where it goes. It might be the fact that, or this is how it used to go in the Netherlands, is that it's transported to a different continent where it's then processed. But is that circular? Is that sustainable? So we need to think about, not only when we think about the circular economy, about reusing materials, but also about the embedded, or like the other impacts or the other kind of criteria that we need to maintain. Think about that donut we looked at, to make sure that we achieve that sustainable future. So when we think about the circular economy, we don't only think about materials, we also think about the fact that we would like all energy to be based on renewable resources, that we extract water at a sustainable rate, and that resource recovery is maximized, that biodiversity is structurally supported, so that we maintain spaces for other species to thrive, right? Or ecosystems to do their thing, keep that biodiversity going. That we also maintain human society and culture, right? So roots in cities are really important for social cohesion and organizing, and making sure that we are doing well or feel community and cohesion in a city, which is tied to health and well-being of humans. So let's make sure that we don't create toxic environments when we recycle, for example. And let's also think about other ways of value. So how do we measure welfare? Right? Can we think about welfare or economic growth not only in a matter of money, financial resources, but perhaps also think about time as a resource, or learning things, or quality of life in sense of spending, having your relatives close, or having a good sense of community. So generating other types of value beyond money. So in every project we take, we take a systems thinking approach. And why this is important is because if we go back to these 7 pillars, we want to make sure that one activity to achieve one of these pillars doesn't impose a negative impact on another one, right? So that's burden shifting. So what we try to do is we try to understand the complex dynamics within a system. So for example, within a city or within a sector. And then this gives us the insight on what the root causes are of the negative impacts that we see. And this can help us to identify interventions or solutions that actually leverage meaningful and lasting change and address these negative impacts in a systemic way. And it also avoids burden shifting, right? So it provides insights and trade-offs. If I take this action, what kind of effects does it have on the system? And am I not imposing negative impact somewhere else? going back to the city, so one of the things that we do at Metabolic is indeed focusing on cities and the built environment. And I wanted to give you 3 examples today. One that addresses creating new systems, because one way of like changing the system on like local state is like showing new ways of living together or creating a circular economy. The other one is changing the existing system, right? So we work with lots of city governments all over the world to drive action and transform their economies into circular ones and create these sustainable living spaces. And then also I wanted to just briefly touch upon how we scale our work, because I mentioned before, Metabolic is an ecosystem of companies. So we also with 100 people can't really work with all the different cities. And of course, there's also lots of other great companies that are doing similar work as for us, but still like we need to move fast. We need to transition now. So we really try to find ways to scale our work and empower others. So the first one is on driving implementation and experimentation from the bottom up. And this is actually how we started at Metabolic. So about 10 years ago, our founder and I wasn't there yet, I was only there 5 years ago, but our founder and a group of people stumbled across a tender from the municipality of Amsterdam that stated we have a Superfund site, so a very polluted old shipyard in the north of Amsterdam. And we are inviting architects or consortia to create a sustainable use of that land. And what we envisioned together with an architect, a landscape architect, the utility company, a local community organization, and many others, is to create a living lab for landing the circular economy or a sustainable urban space within Amsterdam that doesn't only create a space for the community to thrive and to apply new, bring new technologies into practice, but also leave this space cleaner than we got it. So this is the Keuvel. And so what we try to do there is also for each of these 7 pillars, try and bring that into practice, not only using high-tech interventions or solutions, but also thinking about like low-tech solutions and figuring out how we can create like a system in the city. And this has been really successful. It's still here. It's now celebrating its 10th birthday this year. What it's a collection of houseboats that we have taken, like old houseboats that we've remodeled and then placed on the, let's see what the next one is. Yeah, so we've placed them on the land, remodeled them and connected them through a boardwalk. And underneath that boardwalk, we have created a remediating park. So that park is focused on the soil was very heavily polluted with some of the chemicals that were used on the shipyard. So we have this remediating park that slowly draws these chemicals out of the soil. And then every once in a while, we need to cut the plants, and then you still have to burn them because it's still toxic waste. But at least for cleaning that soil, and we are preparing it for future generations. So we have that boardwalk that connects the boats. The boats are also connected by a smart grid, so they exchange energy from their solar panels. So on one end, we have these things like solar panels, smart grids, but on the other hand, we also have low-tech interventions like plants, for example, right? Nature has done its work for many years. So we very much look at like these smart solutions that are also just nature-based, right? So capturing water, all of the boats are off the sewer, so they clean their own water and have compost toilets. We don't produce our own drinking water because that's not legally allowed in the Netherlands. But what we do is we have an aquaponics greenhouse. So aquaponics means that we have a loop system in which we have a fish tank in the bottom. This on the left is actually, just to give a bit more context, is our lab. We give a lot of workshops here. It's one houseboat that has been cut in half by our team. And then the greenhouse is on top of the boat. And in the bottom is a tank of fish that is in a closed loop system with growing vegetables for the cafe on site. So then the cafe, which is like at the left, uses all these vegetables to create food for guests. This is an overview picture, so you can see that there's indeed like 14 houseboats and that they're all connected and placed. And these are used for, it's not for living, but it's used for local startups and community organizations. So it's created a really nice place for everybody to convene, and also in a neighborhood that could really use a space to be and to come together. So it's been a very successful, living lab, bringing stuff into practice, and we are still working on that. So the greenhouse, for example, we've just gotten a grant from the European Union to really experiment with new ways of providing food in neighborhoods. So we're trying and optimizing the technology behind that, the Aquaponics Greenhouse, and then sharing the templates with other communities so that they can upskill. And we are now at the end of the 10-year use period with the government. So we're now working with the same cohort that we worked with 10 years ago to create another proposal for keeping this land and making sure that it doesn't get sold to big developers. So apart from being a really nice spot for the neighborhood, what this also is a showcase. So every year there's thousands of people coming to this site to see what the circular economy could look like in practice, right? So how these technologies work. Oh, what is an aquaponics greenhouse? Oh, what is a smart grid, right? And what does a remediating park look like? So it's a really great way of showcasing that. And it has also triggered innovation in the neighborhood. So after we did this first living lab, the municipality actually worked with us to create a sustainability vision for the whole neighborhood in the north. And that has also triggered other projects. So this is Schoon Schip, clean ship, in the direct translation. This is next door to the Geuvel, and it's actually the first, or I can say the most, not the first, but the most resilient floating neighborhood in Europe, which is also then again like connected to a smart grid, exchanging energy, and there's lots of like smart technologies embedded in that. So it's actually spreading, right? So what have we learned from the Geuvel? So one of the things that we've learned is that sharing knowledge and creating a tangible narrative by grounding a project in physical space is really valuable. It can help others do the same. So this is also a space where we tried lots of new things. Like one of the things that we wanted to do is use the waste, the organic waste from the cafe, and turn that into biogas. But then one of the things we run into is that that's not allowed by Dutch law. So then we try to bend the rules a bit. So we it gives us a bit of a case study to then go to the municipality and see if there's any exemptions that we can create. So we've been working very close with the municipality to try out some of these new experimental zone rules and regulations. So indeed, experimentation helps test new technologies, and they don't always have to be high tech. So innovation is not a criteria. It can also just be a new composition of interventions or solutions. And then finally, like I was saying, a living lab can be a catalyst for the surrounding neighborhoods. And sometimes these experimentation sites can lead to permanence. So this, like, we've really taken a lot from this this project. And when we work with other cities, we always advise to create one of these experimental zones in which these types of projects can flourish, because it creates social cohesion, but also it creates these new types of blueprints that can that are actually critical for creating a sustainable future, right? So new rules and regulations, or new structures of ownership, or new financial models. So it also really helps building these or creating these building blocks. So that was the Geuvel. Now, let's talk a little bit about pushing the existing system, like the bigger urban system, into a different direction, and working with other cities to drive action. And one project specifically, this is a slide that we work with cities all over the world, but I already said that. So one project specifically that I'd like to address is our work in Poland. So after we work with cities in the Netherlands, we've also worked with lots of in the US. We figured we could also work with multiple cities at the same time, which was, I'll tell you, a little bit of a challenge, because cities are big and complex, and then doing that simultaneously was exciting but challenging. But what we did here is we worked with 3 Polish cities to create sustainability strategies and working with local partners to build driving groups, so groups on the ground to activate their knowledge, of course, but also make sure that these strategies are embedded with what is already there. And what we were hoping for is that working with 3 cities at the same time could also create leverage for the national governments to then also become more or take more of a direction into a sustainable sustainability policy and whatnot. So when we work with cities, we usually take these 5 steps. We start with understanding the system. So understanding where we are now. One of the things that we always do is an urban metabolism scan, but we also look at, like I was saying, other factors, and I'll get into that. We then, when we understand where we are, we try and create a vision together with the local group to align on where we're going, because that sets the direction. And then we start backcasting. So what type of interventions do we need to get there? And then we find it very important to stay involved and make things actionable so that implementation happens. So as part of step 2, when we create a vision, we also set measurable goals and create a monitoring framework to keep track of whether we're actually achieving those goals. So how did that work with Poland? We started out,
just to let you know that you did like 25 minutes, so you can still have like 4 or 5 minutes if you want.
That's fine. That's totally good. So so what we did there is we understood where we are now. So figuring out what kind of programs, funding, etc. already there, and what sectors are dominant in a city, and what types of neighborhoods does that city consist of. So we bring all of that together in a neighborhood typology map. So this is also the premise that even though cities have citywide goals, not every neighborhood can contribute in the same way. So here we really looked at the buildup of different neighborhoods as a basis for finding interventions that suits it. Then we set that vision with a monitoring framework. We select interventions. So we often make a long list and work with the driving groups to select the ones that are suitable for the city. And here we created an action toolkit to drive implementation. So these include proven solutions. It includes which stakeholders to include. So these are the ones that we need at the table to make this happen. But it also, we make an assessment on the impact it could have on achieving the vision and how feasible it is. So is there financing that we can tap in? Is there already a European program that you could apply for? And then the goal is to also build new partnerships within stakeholders while getting towards action. So I would invite you to, I'll share the presentation. You could take a closer look. Like this is an example. It includes a timeline and very granular steps to actually, and examples to make this happen. And then we also create a map. We do an assessment on where these different actions could land best. What is the best neighborhood to kick this off with? And this works, or this worked at least in Poland, because the city has officially adopted the strategy. So that means that they're really executing it, and they've already applied for funding in European programs, and they won a national prize. And they've collected, or they've implemented some of our actions, including collection points for bulky waste across the city and capacity building for civil servants. I'm going to pass on this slide, but I do want to quickly touch upon like 3 minutes for this one, because I talked about staying involved from strategy to implementation, briefly addressing the city of Rotterdam, where in 2017, we did an urban metabolism scan. One of the sectors there was the built environment. So you might have seen a Sankey before, or material flow analysis. On the left side, it's all the building materials that go in. And on the right side, it's the ones that, the waste. And what we saw in that analysis is that actually 87% of demolition waste right now is downcycled. So there's opportunity there to do more with that. So secondary materials are really important in achieving a circular economy, because then we don't have to use new ones. So what we then did is we have a big urban mining model at Metabolic that we use to make a projection of construction and demolition flow in the future. So if we understand what is going to free up in terms of materials from the urban mine, that's what we call all the different buildings and all the materials that are already in Rotterdam, then we can also make sure that we can store them so that we can reuse them. And not only looking at materials, also looking at products. So what I mean with a product is, instead of like concrete, I mean door or a window frame. And then we also did an analysis on figuring out what are the best products or elements to reuse and what are the kind of like impacts that we might have to divert. So what kind of processing do we need? And then we did a spatial analysis to figure out, because, you know, if you have supply and demand, it's not always in a temporal way. It doesn't always come together perfectly. So we did a spatial analysis to figure out where we should have a center for processing these secondary materials and storing them so that they can be reused when new construction happens. Just briefly, going from strategy to implementation takes time. We've been involved with Rotterdam for almost 5 years now. It's important to start with solutions that have a high impact and are feasible so that there's like traction or momentum. And then having stakeholders together in a room, like different stakeholders, so different building companies or different players in the supply chain, it can lead, and it will almost always lead to new fundamental finance mechanisms and business models that we really need to create this different future. And I'll leave it with that because I think it's nice to hear from you guys, and I'll share the presentation. You can click through the rest. So I'll stop sharing this and then I can see you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, really, Tamara, for this super interesting presentation, super insightful. Well, let's jump right now to the Q&A session. I can see that we already have several hands that are raised. So as usual, if you have, don't forget to introduce yourself to Tamara before asking your question. Yes, Tanya?
Hi, Tamara. My name is Tanya. I'm doing a PhD at TU Delft on circular.
Nice.
So doing a lot of GIS stuff with LMA data, so the waste data. So kind of same with, probably you know, Arnoud and Rusna. So I'm in this as them. I'm really curious about the second last slide on the circular hubs. Can you talk a bit more about that? How did you identify the locations? Because I'm actually doing some similar research right now.
Oh, great. That's exciting. And also, we worked with Arnoud and Rusna on repair. Maybe you know that project as well. So we created part of the model with them, which is really exciting. And also indeed like a spatial application of a material flow analysis. So what we did is we made so how our urban mining model works is that we look at all the construction permits and demolition permits that are occurring over the next 5 years. Right, so we have that data, and then we plot that spatially, and then we also have the data of what type of building is going to be constructed, and also the typology of the building that is going to be demolished. Now, we've built over the last 8 years, we've built a model, working together with a building surveyor, so someone who actually, like a company called SGS Search, that actually goes to buildings and makes maps on what is in them in terms of materials. So we've created 12 typologies of buildings that we use and plot on these building permits to then make an assessment of the amount of materials and types of elements that will free up. And then we used, and this is something that my spatial analysts know more of than I do, but and then we used the model to see in time what is the best location, and I think it's like network analysis in GIS, but I'm not sure what the actual analysis was. But we used that based on the urban mining model and the quantity and quality of the materials that will free up. Then once we've decided that, like we've opted for a couple of locations for this building storage hub, then it gets really interesting, because then you start getting to this question: who's the owner of the building and materials hub, right? Like, is that a developer in the supply chain, or should it be the government, or is that a separate company that we should start? And what is the finance model, right? Like, how do you create a marketplace for that? What are the logistics to it? So we also look at like the roads, like what is easily accessible, right? You might not want to do an urban mining hub in the city center because it's quite difficult for trucks to get there. So these kind of factors are also in there. And this is also what I meant with, like, if you start implementing, then I mean, it's making a strategy is quite easy, right? Like when you kind of compare it to implementation, because implementation gets nitty gritty, right? Like it's complex. I don't know if that answers your question, Tanya. Like, happy to link you to Martijn also, like if you want to talk a bit more about that urban mining model, or
I'm familiar with the urban mining model, but I'm very curious about the locating of the hubs. Like, what were the criteria, or what are the criteria that you plan to use to locate these hubs?
Yeah, so that's also in line with, like, I showed that map of Poland, right, on the neighborhood typologies, and what are, depending on the amount of people that live there, and how like the location of the neighborhood itself. So these are types of criteria. But I think if you want to know more about that specifically, I think I could best link you to our analyst, because you can
that'd be really
go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I'll email you. Thanks.
Perfect. Cool.
Thank you.
So, Omer.
Hi, my name is
Hi.
Omar. I'm based in Montreal, and I work in mobility and accessibility domains, in particular accessibility of metro stations. And I'm also building on Tanya's question. So, the map about the topography of Poland. You mentioned that you identify different neighborhoods to build this in. I'm curious, what other social aspects are you looking at when you're deciding on the neighborhoods? Is it just the population, or are you thinking about, are people going to be receiving or well receiving of this change in their neighborhoods as well? Is that a part of your decision making?
Yeah, so that's a really excellent question. So one of the things that we look at for these neighborhood typologies is also like density of, and that's also in the scaling part I wanted to show you, is like density of new circular economy businesses. So how much activity is there already? When we talk about these typologies, it's also, of course, linked to different types of actions, right? So an action that is called, like, for example, if we advise a living lab like the Keuvel, right? Now, what do you need for these living labs, right? You need a couple of kind of indicators there. So we need space, probably, right? So the dense city center might not be the best place to propose that, unless there is space. So there's like things in there, like the ratio of green space compared to inhabitants, or the vacant lots, like the quantity of vacant lots, the density of circular businesses, the investment of the governments in these neighborhoods, right? Like, so what kind of like programs are running from the government, like health issues? Is there a very pressing issue with air quality? So mind you, like these are all indicators that we come up with, but then and I'm pretty sure that all of you will be quite aware of this, but not every city has great data. So it's also linked to, like, we have models, like we have a great guy called Joey, who is a wizard with GIS and has created a whole model that pulls data from everywhere. But then, of course, like how granular you can get, and if you can actually get certain data on a neighborhood level, is depending on the city you work with. So that's like one big question that we often run into. So to your question of like what kind of data points do you use, like these are a couple, but it will also differ per city, and that's one of the points I also wanted to stress, is that there's not like, and that's the difficulty. There's not really like a one size fits all approach, right? Like there's we are working together with this company called Circular Economy and with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation with Equally to create this tool that on one side automates the analysis and just creates a database of solutions for cities. But then what we run into is you can't really automate a strategy, because we really have to first do the analysis for city based on the data they have. So, right, so how rigorous an analysis is and how rigorous a strategy is and how applied it is so tied to the people and organizations that are in the city, or like the social fabric. And we cannot escape the fact that cities are built up with humans. So it's quite important to actually have people on the ground that look at that data, identify what is possible, and then see what we can do and see what we can tailor. Yeah. Does that answer a bit of that, Omer?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. No, because there's a lot more data topics in the presentation, and I was curious about like how people are coming into this conversation as well. So that's good. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Omer. Ruth.
Hi. Yeah, Ruth. Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Ruth Nelson, and I'm doing a PhD also at TU Delft on the subject of urban inequality, which is also a huge sort of systemic issue And something that interested me in your presentation was that you mentioned a couple of times that policy can be a barrier to some of the things that your company wanted to do. You also mentioned the importance of stakeholders and how important it is when you are dealing with a systemic issue that you involve stakeholders. And I was wondering if your projects tend to start with someone in an organization or in government reaching out to you and bringing you in, or if it starts with the company and you're in the position where you have to reach out to various stakeholders, and how, I don't know if you have any insights you could share with us, but how you get them on board or how you convince them to kind of just come on and even just be involved in the process, because that's their time. And so that's just what I'm interested in. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Ruth, you're touching upon a couple of really challenging things, right? Like one of the things is that we always want to work with these cities, but government officials already have a job. So it's not as if they can just like join us and kind of like help us create all of this. The second point I wanted to raise is that cities are at different points of readiness, right? So some cities are like down, like I want to create a strategy I want to do tomorrow. I have this group I've organized. I already have this community organization that has built groups and neighborhoods, and let's go. When that happens, it's really it's great, right? So we work with the city of Cleveland to create their sustainability strategy, and they actually received a really big grant and had already organized, and like it's been really fruitful to work with them because they've done the organization already. Because of course, like we're based in Amsterdam, and we are not going to be the ones that drive this project forward. So what we do when like for example, in Poland, there was quite a bit of a disparity, like in this case, and that's also something we learned a lot from, is we got a grant to select cities in Poland and then start working with them. But these cities were like Kraków, like one of the cities the one that I showed now, was quite ready and excited. But then these other two cities were at very different spaces in developing their strategies and having actual organizing in their cities. So each of these cities needed a different approach. And what we saw in Krakow is that what really works in building these driving groups, like you can start by always working with one local partner based in a city and asking them like, hey, what are the champions for the built environment, right? Like what companies are active, or what are the champions for the agri-food sector? Like, can we start with these two sectors? These are all like almost always the most impactful sectors in cities. So can we start building driving groups around these? And then identifying some of these like low-hanging fruit actions to then build out these coalitions further. But I would say we always need to involve a local organization that kind of takes care of these driving groups and creates the cadence of getting them together and kind of making sure that like the actions have an owner, and that there is working together. I hope that answers a little bit of your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights. Thanks.
Thanks. Gustavo.
Hey, Tamara. Thank you for your presentation. I am from Ecuador. I am a special data scientist and an architect, and I'm currently working on a startup in the logistics industry. So very interesting in your topic about circular economy. I think that is a fascinating conceptual framework for projects, especially in some projects that developed in the Netherlands. But my question is related to the applicability in other environments. I know that there are very successful projects in the Netherlands and other European environment countries. However, when you go to environments such as Latin America, North America, Asia, you see kind of these initiatives, but most of them don't have a huge impact, or perhaps they fail. So my question here is, if you have some experience working in other environments apart from Europe, and where do you see the approach so these kind of projects of circular economies could work?
I'm very happy you asked that question because also, of course, like in the beginning of the presentation, we saw that like we keep it with cities because, of course, our work with companies is often like more dispersed all over the world. But with cities, we saw that the growth of cities is mainly happening not in Northern Europe or not in the US, right? So and that also the material and energy demand is going to take place more and more in these cities that are rapidly growing. So this is something that we have, really tried to actively work with. So we are, for example, like the thing is that we don't have a lot of context knowledge there, and we don't like, that was already challenging in Poland, right? I don't speak Polish, which proved to be a huge barrier because I couldn't read any of the policy. I couldn't discuss, like I always had to have a translator. So that's one of the things that we are very mindful of. So what we prefer to do is then create these tools for other cities to use, or for other organizations and companies that have similar missions to ours to use, right? So that we provide insight and tools. So that's one way of engaging. Another way of engaging is one example that I could give is we are now working together with ICLI. So ICLI is a network of cities. So we have lots of these partners, but ICLI has a very big network of cities with local offices. And we work together with one of their local offices and an urban government in Porto Alegre in Brazil. And what we do there is we have showcased how to work with schools. So taking 2 schools as a point of departure and then showcasing that these are kind of like impacts on schools and blueprints on how to create your public schools in a more, or like refurbish them in a more sustainable way, and then educate kids alongside. But then we work with equally local offices and also a local organization and local government to then create these blueprints. So it might not be that we, I also wanted to add that some cities have stronger governments than other cities. So in some cities, there's a lot of data available because the governments track a lot, and then others, it's not as much. So then again, we need to think about the kind of approach. So working with schools is more of a bottom-up approach. We take a couple of buildings, show examples, and build strategy from that point. Or we start with a strategy and then start landing it. So I think it differs a bit. We are also working more with local organizations then. So identifying a couple of pioneers, for example, Living Lab in the city, like that, and then working with the group that is developing it to then advise them. So it's more than capacity building, than really creating strategies. I hope, does that answer a bit of your question?
Yes. I just have a minor question after that. So you think it's more about the proposal with the government, or is about the engaging with the culture, with the people of each place, so they can adapt to these new circular economies?
I think it's all of it, right? So I think if we want to transition to a sustainable future, we need everybody on board. We also like the beginning, right, of the presentation, where we're saying that the physical footprint of a city is much larger than than that physical footprint. We have all these supply chains, and these supply chains are actually built up of companies, right? So we also need to engage the private sector, and we need to engage new startups, and we need to make sure that these that governments, municipal governments, are aware of all these startups and how they contribute to the goals that are set on the governmental level. So it's really about engaging all of these different, and that's what I know that stakeholders is a bit of a hollow sentence, but that's what I mean when I say stakeholders, right? It's all these actors in the supply chain, but also the community organizations that have been organizing in their neighborhoods and that already created these networks of implementation, right? Because at the end of the day, a city is a physical space. It's not a person. It's not an entity. You can just okay, I'm working with city. No, it's a place. So it's important to then have a good overview of who's doing what, and that's part of that first scan that we do, and also ties into that readiness assessment that we make. Where is this city? What does it need?
Mm-hmm. Well,
and then finally, I just to say one thing more about your point, Gustavo, and then I'll stop rambling about this one and go on. But I think that the kind of creating these databases and the work that we are doing, that I was touching briefly on, automating or just providing a website or a tool that cities can access and see okay, so this is what other cities are doing, or that entrepreneurs can access or community organizations can access that this is what other cities can do, like my city. Oh, this is the example. Oh, this is a useful resource. That's also something that we really work towards, and that's work that is often funded by private philanthropies, or the European Union has a lot of programs for that. So we tap into that with our institute to produce these kind of tools.
That's amazing. I would love to see them. Thank you, Tamara.
Yeah, thanks, Gustavo. Gabor, please tell me if I pronounce your name wrong.
Yes, it was correct. It was correct.
Okay.
Hey, Tamara. I'm an IoT engineer currently in Taiwan. And today, for some reason, my internet connection is really bad, so I might disconnect at any point. But I wanted to ask you about your company's attitude towards technology. It sounds like it's a pretty healthy relationship with technology. It's not praising it as the solution to all the problems. It's more like a tool, as you mentioned, to apply in the last stages to scale up solutions. And I was wondering if any insights you have, things related to the use of technologies or the data governance, or for example, is there maybe some kind of process within the company to make decisions about technology?
Yeah, so I think I got the gist of what you were saying, because you cut out a couple of times, but I think what you were asking is our attitude towards technology, how we use it within the company, and what are, like, how we decide on how far to go with technology, or when to use it, right? So apart from like that scaling point, and I think you also addressed that, what we really see as very important for us right now is that we automate as much as we can, because we have a really great group of people with great brains, but we don't want to have them do the same analyses over and over. So we want to like use technology and software solutions to make our own work better, so that we can also focus on the human part, right? Like landing strategies in companies, making sure that things move forward, that we actually achieve the goals that we've set. So that's one of the things that we are very much emphasizing on. Of course, there is more and more of a, you know, like when we work with data, there's also the big question of cybersecurity. So that's something that we're thinking about a lot. Like, how can we store all of this? Like, what does that mean when, right? Open data is very important, but there's still lots of private companies that don't have open data. So if we really want to address, if we want to address these or measure where we're going as a world, like it's interesting to also think about data sovereignty and in relation to technology, right? Like, how accurate is something when you don't have access to some of these crucial information parts. And then in terms of ethics, like oftentimes technology is kind of like equated with innovation, right? Like, so a lot of like times, like when we come up with strategies, it's like we need to innovate, but I don't think that innovation is always the answer. I do feel that, and this is also my personal opinion coming from earth sciences and community work and urban design, is that it is very important to also question yourself in that, and also ask financing, the financing sector questions, right? Because there's a very big bias towards funding technology over funding local organizations that have already done decades of good work. So, you know, like it's a bit of finding balance. Like, we believe in technology and that it's very useful for monitoring and automating and making sure that we, there's lots of great solutions in there, but we also need to be mindful of the fact that some things have already been invented and they work really well, like some natural solutions, right? Like nature-based solutions, or like some organizations have already done great work. How can we empower them? Is that through technology, or is that something else? And how can we teach others to use things? So these are a couple of considerations. I hope that answers a bit of the question.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Then Maxime.
Yeah, I think you can hear me now. Hi, Tamara. How are you doing? I'm Maxime. I'm based in Rotterdam, so pretty close by from you guys. I am an engineer by formation, but now I am a strategic designer. Mm-hmm. And then the question is, because I have some ongoing, full disclaimer, collaboration with you guys on other projects. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, you're talking about technologies and how we can push forward certain ideas, and in the same time you have like technology, and you guys are a group of organizations. And the question becomes of, like, I think we both understand that many externalities are coming in between companies that are separated from each other. So you count on saying, this guy is going to be the one taking care of my externalities. I don't have to care about it. And then it all goes down the chain like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
The question is like, how do you do this internally? Because you create those kind of ventures. So basically you are in charge of your own externalities, which I think is very healthy. But then at the same time, like, how do you create relationship with other companies where you reduce together those kind of externalities? Like, I assume it comes also between like a contractual relationship between each other and having a really different way of, it's not just governance models, but it's more like contractual models. How do you make conscious contracting, social contracts? Very broad question.
So
good luck.
I feel like you're asking a couple of questions. So I think the first question is like, how do we collaborate within, like, so we call ourselves an ecosystem. Although we are, like we have these different entities, we call them. We're in the same building, and we have a weekly meeting with all the leads of the entities to share what we're doing and keep track of all the work. We have a lot of focus within the company on sharing knowledge and insights. So we're all pretty nerdy. So we like to get together and ask our collective brains questions and also like show different perspectives, right? Like, for example, I'm not as familiar with software building, but my colleagues are. So I like when there's something that touches upon that, I get them in a room and we use that collective brain. So those are some of the things that we do internally to make sure that, like, we don't work in silos, because we definitely, I think working in silos for governments, for example, or for companies is one of the biggest challenges, right? Like you can't, like let's get everybody on board and not do one thing in one place and then the other one in the other place. So we really try to create that flow of information internally. That means that we also have people that have a dedicated role, right, on keeping our methods clear and aligning with these other teams. So that's what we do internally in that sense. We also have like clear follow-up trajectories, right? So maybe our institute produces this really awesome new methodology on consumption-based emissions, right? So figuring out scope 3 emissions for cities. What we then do is we, with consultancy, practice that methodology with a city in their strategy. So we try to get on-the-ground experience that then feeds back into the open model of the institute. So that's an example. Same goes for software, right? So if we work with a company that has, and we've delivered a strategy and they've set very clear goals, we can also have our software team create a monitoring tool for them to measure their KPIs, right? So this is like a little bit of that interaction that we use. So it is also so that it creates a lot of, like efficiency when you have these different kind of instruments in-house. Your other question was like, how do you keep the ventures that you produce close? And you might be working with Fresh, is that true?
Oh, I'm working with Nico.
With Nico, oh, great. That's Nico is great. So that must be fun. So for example, we have a couple of these ventures. One of them, Spectral, is already also like 70 people big. So that's a company focused on energy. And then one of the things we do is we have a party tonight. So we all go to their offices and hang out. So we really try and keep that ecosystem close. We also have a yearly retreat where we talk about strategy and share ideas and talk about these things like ethics, right? Like, are we all aligned on the types of work we do and the types of work we don't do? So we try to really question each other's strategies and then keep aligned in that sense. I hope that answers a little bit of I think you had a couple of questions, but did I capture it?
Yeah, no, you definitely touched it.
Okay.
And then the last point, it's more related between like, if you actually want to create changes in the built environment, you're not going to be able to do it alone, as you said in the beginning.
Yeah.
So you need to create those kind of spaces where this is like happening even without you. So how do you create external relationship with other kind of companies?
Yeah. So this is actually a really interesting example. So one of the things that we're doing right now is we are This is funded by Loudis Foundation. It's this other philanthropic organization. And what we are doing with them is we're trying to transform the built environment sector in Europe. So that's like quite a bit, like we like challenges. This is one of them. So we're working with a group of partners and we've identified 4 systemic challenges. Like if we can overcome these things for the built environment sector, so that's not only developers, but it's also developers, architects, materials, banks, like funders, like all of these people that are involved in that sector. If we can work together to figure out how to overcome these 4 challenges, and create blueprints that can really, 1, influence the policy landscape, and 2, at European level, and 2, also create a relationship between front runners. So what we try to do is really get people on board that are reinventing rules and regulations and these kind of things, but also kind of make sure that we capture their learnings and then bring them to that level of the policy on European level. So that's like how we create these types of driving groups on that scale. And then the Loudis Foundation gave us some funding as well to enable these front runners to participate and to expand their work. So looking at systemic financing and also then creating a longer term trajectory for them to move that forward. So the idea here is that once we have these blueprints, we can also have, like help them apply for funding to bring these things forward and create their own environment and ecosystem.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tamara. I think we are good with the questions. Really, thanks a lot for taking the time to answer all the questions despite the jet lag. Thanks also for the interesting and inspiring presentation. So our next lecture will be next week with Hélène Chartier, who is Director of Design and Urban Planning at C40, and she will talk about low carbon cities. And for those of you who want to stay in the room to discuss this lecture, you are more than welcome. Thanks again, Tamara, and bye.
Thank you all, and please reach out if you have any more questions. And have fun with the rest of the lectures. Thanks.